Pay up $2,800 immediately, or we'll foreclose and take your house.
That was the threat the HOA president delivered that Tuesday morning. A bright pink Porsche rolled up my gravel driveway, kicking up dust on the land my grandfather bought with his life savings in 1987, 15 years before her association even existed. Vivian Ashford stepped out in designer sunglasses, smugly demanding community fees from someone who never joined her HOA, never signed any agreement, and never used their amenities.
We have lawyers, and we run this neighborhood. You'll follow our rules.
She smirked.
Huge mistake coming here.
Good. You're gonna need them.
I'm a retired marine engineer, 30 years building unbreakable systems. Yet she harassed me relentlessly. Collection calls, lawyer threats, security guards blocking my own family's driveway, all for money the law says I don't owe. What Vivian didn't know, I had an ace up my sleeve. Would you let them steal your family's legacy, or stand your ground? Stick around, the revenge is ice-cold satisfying. Garrett Riverside wasn't the kind of guy you'd want to cross on a good day, let alone when you're trying to steal his land. At 61, he carried himself with that unmistakable military bearing, back straight, eyes sharp, every movement deliberate. His weathered hands told the story of 3 decades building precision machinery for the Marine Corps, and now he spent his retirement crafting custom metalwork in the garage of his family's 2-acre corner lot. The property had history. Garrett inherited it from his grandfather, who'd bought the land back in 1987 when it was still surrounded by cornfields. The house sat on a slight rise, giving him a clear view of everything that went on in the subdivision that had sprung up around him over the years. Cedar Oaks, what a pretentious name for what used to be Miller's farm. His divorce 3 years earlier had been ugly, but at least he'd kept the house. His daughter Sarah had been trying to patch things up lately, bringing the grandkids by on weekends. His elderly mother still visited monthly, shuffling around the kitchen in her fuzzy slippers, always commenting on how he needed more color in his flower beds. The smell of motor oil and metal shavings permanently clung to his garage workshop, where he spent most mornings tinkering with hydraulic systems and precision welding. Some guys played golf in retirement. Garrett built things that could withstand hurricanes. He'd always been suspicious of authority, a trait that served him well during his 28 years dealing with military procurement contracts. He kept detailed logbooks of everything, maintenance schedules, visitor logs, even weather patterns. His PTSD from 2 tours overseas made him hyper-vigilant about home security, but it also made him incredibly thorough when documenting threats. Which brings us to Vivian Ashford. If you took everything annoying about entitled suburban housewives and concentrated it into one perfectly spray-tanned package, you'd get Vivian. At 48, she'd married into money when she snagged developer Marcus Ashford at some charity golf tournament. Now she spent her days driving around in a hot pink Porsche Cayenne, filming herself for social media while supposedly managing community standards. Vivian had been elected HOA president the previous year on a platform of elevating property values through enhanced aesthetics. Translation: she wanted to turn Cedar Oaks into her personal Pinterest board, regardless of who got bulldozed in the process. The woman had never worked a real job in her life. But she approached HOA management like she was running a Fortune 500 company. She wore designer athleisure to board meetings, spoke entirely in corporate buzzwords, and treated anyone who disagreed with her like they were personally sabotaging her vision of suburban perfection. The trouble started on a Tuesday morning in March, when Garrett found a certified letter in his mailbox. The return address made his jaw clench: Cedar Oaks Homeowners Association, Community Enhancement Division. Inside, printed on letterhead so fancy it probably cost more than his monthly grocery budget, was a bill. Not a request, not a friendly notice, a bill. Mandatory beautification assessment, $2,800. Payment due within 30 days to avoid penalty fees and potential lien placement. Below that, in smaller print, additional ongoing maintenance fees of $400 monthly will commence following initial assessment compliance. Garrett read it twice, his engineer's mind immediately spotting about 6 different legal problems. First, he'd never signed any HOA agreement. Second, his property predated their formation by 15 years. Third, his landscaping already exceeded their published standards. He'd checked. But the real kicker was at the bottom. Non-compliance will result in daily fines of $100 until standards are met. He walked outside and looked at his meticulously maintained yard. His roses were already blooming, his lawn was perfectly edged, and his driveway didn't have a single crack. Meanwhile, he could see 3 houses in the HOA section with peeling paint and overgrown hedges. The audacity was breathtaking. But Garrett had learned something important during his years in military procurement. When someone comes at you with fraudulent paperwork, you document everything and strike back twice as hard. Garrett spent that first evening doing what any former military engineer would do. He researched. His dining room table disappeared under property deeds, county records, and subdivision plats dating back to 1987. The crunch of potato chips punctuated his work as he cross-referenced legal documents until well past midnight. What he found was exactly what he'd suspected. His property deed clearly showed purchase date of March 15, 1987. The Cedar Oaks HOA incorporation papers, filed with the county on September 3, 2002, 15 years later. In the eyes of the law, trying to force him into their association was like trying to draft someone into the army after they'd already retired. He drafted a response letter that was polite but firm, including copies of all relevant documentation. The next morning, he hand-delivered it to Vivian's house, a gaudy McMansion that looked like a wedding cake exploded in the middle of a golf course. 3 days later, he got his answer. Garrett was replacing a hydraulic fitting on his workshop press when he heard the rumble of trucks outside. Through his garage window, he watched a landscaping crew unload flats of pink and white impatiens near his front walkway. "Excuse me," he called out, wiping grease from his hands with a shop rag. "What's going on here?" The crew foreman, a weathered guy who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, held up a work order. "Says here we're supposed to plant seasonal color enhancement for the Riverside property, community beautification project." Community beautification? Garrett's voice carried that dangerous calm that his ex-wife had learned to fear. "On my property? Without my permission?" The foreman shrugged apologetically. "Look, buddy, I just do what the work order says. Take it up with the HOA lady." For the next hour, Garrett watched as the crew systematically destroyed his carefully planned vegetable garden to make room for their gaudy flowers. His prized tomato seedlings, varieties he'd been cultivating for 3 years, got ripped out and tossed into a mulch truck. The impatiens they planted instead looked like they'd been chosen by someone who thought more expensive automatically meant better. But the real problem wasn't the flowers, it was the soil amendment they used. Garrett's engineering background included enough chemistry to recognize trouble when he smelled it. The rich, earthy scent of his composted soil was now overwhelmed by the sharp, artificial odor of chemical fertilizer mixed with something else, something that made his nose itch. Later analysis would reveal they'd introduced an invasive grass species along with the new plantings. But right then, all Garrett knew was that strangers had trespassed on his property and destroyed weeks of careful preparation for his spring garden. He spent the rest of the afternoon documenting everything. Photos from multiple angles, measurements of the damaged area, soil samples sealed in labeled containers. His grandfather's old surveying compass helped him establish exact property boundaries. Every detail went into his logbook with military precision. That evening, he composed a formal cease and desist letter. Not some angry rant, but a proper legal document citing specific property laws and trespassing statutes. He'd learned during his procurement days that the right legal language could stop bureaucrats in their tracks faster than any amount of shouting. The response came faster than expected. 2 days later, Vivian herself showed up at his door, wearing yoga pants that probably cost more than his monthly utilities and carrying a folder thick with official-looking papers. "Mr. Riverside," she said in that syrupy voice people use when they're about to screw you over, "I think there's been a misunderstanding about our community improvement initiative." Garrett listened with growing amazement as she explained how the county had supposedly passed a community enhancement ordinance that gave HOAs authority to improve any property that detracted from neighborhood aesthetics. She produced documents, impressive ones with official seals and legal terminology. "So you see," she concluded with a satisfied smile, "we're actually helping you comply with county requirements. The impatiens were just the first phase." Here's something I learned from a lawyer friend years later. When someone shows up with a stack of legal-looking papers, always ask for the ordinance number and filing date. Real laws have reference numbers. Fake ones just have impressive letterhead. Garrett asked for exactly that information. Vivian's smile flickered for just a moment before she recovered. "I'll have my assistant send you the reference numbers," she said. "Now about those outstanding fees." But Garrett was already mentally 3 moves ahead. If they wanted to play legal games, he'd show them what precision looked like. The mini twist was realizing Vivian's county ordinance was complete fiction, but she was committed enough to fake documentation that this was about to get much more interesting. Those reference numbers never came, of course. What came instead was a security company. Garrett first noticed the white SUV parked across from his driveway on a Thursday morning. 2 guys in matching polo shirts sat inside, engine running, apparently watching his house. The acrid smell of their exhaust drifted across his yard every time the wind shifted. By noon, they were still there. By 3 o'clock, when his mother arrived for her weekly visit, they blocked his driveway completely. "Excuse me," Garrett approached the driver's window, noting the cheap security company logo on their shirts. "You're blocking my driveway." The driver, a beefy guy with a military haircut that fooled nobody, rolled down his window halfway. "Private security patrol, sir. We're monitoring compliance with community standards." "Compliance with what exactly?" "Outstanding violations, sir. Property owner needs to settle fees before resuming normal access." Garrett felt his blood pressure spike. "This is my private driveway on my private property. You have no legal authority to block access." The passenger, younger, dumber looking, snickered. "Actually, we do. Public easement for community safety. Check your HOA agreement." "I don't have an HOA agreement." "Well then, sounds like you need to get one." Garrett's mother rolled down her car window. At 83, Eleanor Riverside had survived the Depression, raised 5 kids, and buried 2 husbands. She did not suffer fools gladly. "Young man," she called out in her sweetest grandmother voice, "are you going to move that truck, or do I need to call my nephew at the sheriff's department?" For 3 hours, Garrett's mother sat in her car while he made phone calls. The security company claimed they were operating under community safety protocols. The sheriff's department said it was a civil matter unless actual laws were broken. Even the non-emergency line bounced him between departments. Finally, around 6 p.m., the guards left. But not before the passenger made a point of walking around Garrett's front yard, taking pictures with his phone and making notes on a clipboard. The next morning, Garrett woke to find fresh tire tracks across his front lawn, deep ones, like someone had deliberately driven back and forth to tear up the grass. The morning dew made the damage look even worse, dark brown scars cutting through what used to be a perfect green carpet. But here's where Garrett's paranoia paid off. Those security cameras he'd installed after his divorce captured everything. High-definition footage of the white SUV arriving at 2:17 a.m., the guards getting out, and the passenger taking a crowbar to his mailbox before driving figure-8s across his lawn. More importantly, the cameras caught them dumping something near his property line, something that became clear when Garrett investigated that afternoon. Survey stakes, bright orange plastic markers claiming to establish a public easement that somehow extended 15 feet into his property. Now, here's a knowledge nugget that might save you some trouble someday. Property easements are real legal concepts that give others limited rights to use your land for specific purposes. But they have to be properly filed with the county, clearly defined in legal descriptions, and established through legitimate legal processes. You can't just stick some stakes in the ground and declare yourself an easement. Translation: when someone tries to claim rights to your property, demand to see the recorded easement documents at the county recorder's office. Garrett spent his afternoon doing exactly that. The county clerk, a patient woman who'd probably dealt with property disputes for decades, pulled up every easement filed in Cedar Oaks since 1980. Nothing. No public easements, no utility rights of way, nothing that would give an HOA authority over his land. That evening, he installed motion-activated lights around his entire property perimeter, military-grade LED floods that could turn night into day at the first hint of movement. If these clowns wanted to play nighttime games, he'd make sure everyone in the neighborhood could watch. He also made copies of the security footage and hand-delivered them to the sheriff's department, along with a formal complaint about destruction of property and fraudulent survey markers. This time, he got a different response. Deputy Martinez, a young woman who actually seemed interested in doing her job, reviewed the footage with professional attention. "Sir, this is pretty clear evidence of criminal mischief and possibly fraud. We can definitely pursue charges if you want to press them." "I want to press them." "Good. And sir, you might want to consider getting a restraining order. this pattern of escalation. It usually gets worse before it gets better. The mini twist hit him that night as he was updating his incident log. The guards weren't just harassing him randomly. They were creating evidence of easements and violations to justify their presence. Someone was building a paper trail to steal his land, but two could play that game. And Garrett was about to teach them the difference between amateur hour and precision warfare. The restraining order was supposed to keep the security goons away from Garrett's property. It worked for exactly 5 days. Tuesday night, Garrett was in his workshop calibrating a hydraulic pressure gauge when his motion lights blazed to life. Through the side window, he could see figures moving around his prized rose garden, the collection he'd been nurturing for 8 years, some varieties dating back to cuttings from his grandmother's farm. By the time he grabbed his phone and got outside, they were gone. But the damage was unmistakable. Someone had dumped about 3 cubic yards of decorative wood mulch directly on top of his roses. The sweet scent of cedar chips couldn't mask what they'd done. His Lady of Shalott climber was completely buried, along with 2 David Austin shrub roses that had taken 4 years to establish. But this wasn't random vandalism. This was surgical destruction disguised as improvement. The mulch was expensive stuff, the kind of red cedar chips that cost $8 a bag at garden centers. Someone had spent real money to destroy his garden while making it look like they were trying to help. The note zip-tied to his mailbox confirmed his suspicions. Courtesy mulching service provided by Cedar Oaks Community Enhancement. Seasonal garden refresh to maintain neighborhood standards. Invoice to follow. Garrett spent the next morning carefully excavating his roses, using a shop vacuum to remove mulch from between the thorny branches. The sound of the vacuum motor couldn't drown out his growing anger, but his engineering discipline kept him focused on documentation. Photos before, during, and after. Soil pH measurements to check for chemical contamination, even time-lapse video as he restored each plant. The invoice arrived 2 days later, $12,200 for emergency landscaping intervention to address community compliance violations. That's when Garrett decided to build a fence, not just any fence, an 8-foot privacy barrier using military specifications. Steel posts set in concrete, marine-grade hardware, pressure-treated lumber that could survive a hurricane. He pulled the permits himself, ensuring everything was absolutely legal and positioned exactly on his surveyed property line. The fence took him 6 days to build, working methodically from dawn to dusk. The rhythmic sound of his pneumatic nail gun punctuated the spring air as curious neighbors gathered to watch. Some offered help, others just shook their heads at the drama unfolding in their quiet subdivision. On the 7th day, he rested. On the 8th day, Vivian brought a bulldozer. Garrett was having his morning coffee when he heard the diesel engine rumbling down Maple Street. Through his kitchen window, he watched a yellow Cat 420 backhoe loader turn into his driveway, followed by Vivian's pink Porsche and a truck full of construction workers. The machine's operator, a sunburned guy who looked distinctly uncomfortable with the situation, climbed down as Vivian approached Garrett's front door. "Mr. Riverside," she announced loudly enough for the gathering crowd to hear, "this fence violates our sightline ordinance and creates a safety hazard. We're here to remove the obstruction." Garrett stepped onto his porch, permit paperwork in hand. "What sightline ordinance?" "Community Safety Code 12.3a. No barriers exceeding 6 feet in height within 50 feet of public thoroughfares." Here's another knowledge nugget that might save you someday. HOAs can only enforce rules that are properly recorded in legal documents called covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CC&Rs. These have to be filed with the county and cannot contradict local building codes or property rights. If someone claims you're violating an HOA rule, demand to see the specific language in the recorded CC&Rs. Translation: if they can't show you the exact rule in writing from officially recorded documents, they're probably making it up. Garrett had spent the previous evening researching every covenant and restriction ever filed in Cedar Oaks. "Show me the recorded CC&R language," he said calmly. Vivian's perfectly contoured eyebrows flickered almost imperceptibly. "My legal team will provide documentation after the safety violation is resolved." "No documentation, no removal. This fence was built with proper permits and meets all county requirements." For a moment they stared at each other across the battle lines. Then Vivian smiled that predatory smile and gestured to the bulldozer operator. "Jorge, please proceed with obstruction removal." Jorge looked from Vivian to Garrett to the growing crowd of neighbors with their phones out. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see some legal authorization before I can destroy someone's fence. This could be a criminal matter." I'll take full responsibility, Vivian snapped. Just do your job. That's when Garrett pulled out his phone and called 911. Not the non-emergency line, not the civil disputes department. Full 911, reporting attempted destruction of private property. The mini-twist came when Jorge refused to operate the bulldozer without legal authorization. Even Vivian's threats couldn't convince a working man to risk criminal charges for her suburban power games. But as the crowd dispersed and Vivian retreated, Garrett realized this wasn't over. It was escalating, and the next move would determine whether he spent his retirement fighting lawyers or teaching them a lesson they'd never forget. 3 weeks later, Garrett was organizing his property documents when he found something that changed everything. He'd requested a complete survey of his lot boundaries, partly for legal protection and partly because something about the HOA's aggressive tactics suggested they knew something he didn't. The surveyor, Mike Henderson, was a methodical guy who'd been mapping properties in the county for 25 years. "Garrett," Mike said, unrolling a large plat map across the kitchen table. "You need to see this." The smell of fresh ink and paper filled the room as Mike traced property lines with his finger. Everything looked normal until he reached the eastern boundary, the side facing the HOA's crown jewel, their community clubhouse and pool complex. "See this red line here? That's your property boundary according to the original 1987 deed. Now look at this blue line. That's where the HOA built their pool deck." Garrett leaned closer, his engineer's eye immediately grasping the implications. The HOA's expensive pool deck, the centerpiece of their community amenities, extended 15 feet onto his land. 15 feet? Garrett's voice was carefully controlled. "How long has this been like this?" Mike pulled out a folder of aerial photos. Based on Google Earth imagery, they built the pool deck in 2019, so we're talking about 4 years of unauthorized use of your property. But it got better. Mike had done his homework, researching every permit and legal document related to the pool construction. The HOA had never requested an easement, never applied for approval to encroach on neighboring property, never even acknowledged that their multi-million-dollar amenity was partially built on land they didn't own. "Mike, what's the fair market rent for this kind of property use?" The surveyor grinned. "Well, waterfront pool deck space in this neighborhood, I'd say about $58,000 per year, maybe more given the premium location." Garrett did the math in his head. 58,000 times 4 years. $232,000 in unauthorized use of his property. But the real revelation came when Mike showed him the construction permits. Here's the interesting part, Garrett. When they applied for the pool permit, they submitted a site plan that shows the deck ending exactly at the property line. Either their contractor made a massive 15-foot error, or someone deliberately decided to encroach on your land. The engineering drawings were precise, professional, and completely wrong. Not wrong by accident, wrong by design. Someone had calculated that it was easier to steal 15 feet of Garrett's land than to redesign their pool deck to fit their actual property. That evening, Garrett sat on his back porch with a beer and his grandfather's old compass, staring at the pool deck that shouldn't exist. Through the chain-link fence, he could see HOA members enjoying their evening swim, completely unaware that they were trespassing with every backstroke. The sound of laughter and splashing water drifted across the yard as kids played Marco Polo in the shallow end. Part of him felt bad about what was coming. These were his neighbors, after all. But they were enjoying amenities built on stolen land, and their HOA president had been systematically harassing him while sitting on evidence of their own massive violation. Here's a knowledge nugget that every property owner should understand. Adverse possession and trespassing are two different things. Adverse possession requires open, notorious, continuous use for a specific period, usually 15 to 20 years, with intent to claim ownership. Simple trespassing is just using someone else's property without permission, and the property owner can demand compensation for that use at any time. Translation: when someone builds on your land without permission, you can bill them fair market rent for every day they've used your property, and they have to pay or move. Garrett pulled out his phone and called the property attorney Mike had recommended, not to sue anybody yet, just to understand his options. The conversation was enlightening. Not only could he demand back rent for the encroachment, but he could also require the HOA to either purchase the land at fair market value or remove their structure completely. Their choice. As he hung up the phone, Garrett looked back at the pool deck and smiled for the first time in weeks. Vivian had been so busy harassing him about fake violations that she'd completely overlooked her own association's massive, expensive, and completely illegal trespass. The power dynamics had just shifted, dramatically. Garrett spent the next morning doing what Marines do best, planning a precision operation. His dining room transformed into a command center with survey maps, legal documents, and engineering diagrams covering every surface. The smell of strong coffee mixed with the earthy scent of the potted plants his mother kept bringing over, creating an oddly domestic backdrop for what was essentially warfare preparation. First order of business, understanding exactly what he was dealing with. The pool deck wasn't just a simple concrete slab. This was an engineered cantilever structure extending over the water, supported by steel beams anchored deep into the ground. The 15-foot section on his property included not just the deck surface but the structural supports, underground utilities, and even part of the pool filtration system. Removing it would cost the HOA somewhere north of $200,000. But here's where Garrett's engineering background gave him a serious advantage. He understood exactly how the structure worked, and more importantly, how it could be made to stop working. Those steel support beams were anchored with hydraulic connections, designed to handle the dynamic loads of people moving around on the deck. But hydraulic systems are only as strong as their weakest connection. And if someone who understood hydraulic engineering wanted to create a controlled failure, Garrett spent 3 days designing what he privately called the pool deck adjustment system. Not destruction, adjustment. The structure would remain intact, it would just be repositioned to match the actual property boundaries. How's that for precision? But the engineering was only half the battle. The legal strategy required equal care. Garrett's attorney, David Palmer, was a property law specialist who'd handled dozens of boundary disputes. David had that rare combination of legal expertise and practical common sense that comes from dealing with neighbor feuds for 20 years. Garrett, you have 3 options here, David explained during their first meeting. 1. Demand they remove the encroachment entirely. 2. Negotiate a sale of the affected property at fair market value. 3. Collect back rent for unauthorized use and establish a formal lease going forward. What would you recommend? Honestly, start with option 3. Calculate exactly what they owe you for 4 years of use, present it professionally, and see how they respond. If they're reasonable, you can negotiate. If they're not. David's smile suggested he'd dealt with plenty of unreasonable HOAs. The financial calculations took 2 days of research. Fair market rent for premium pool-adjacent property in Cedar Oaks averaged $58,000 per year. 4 years of unauthorized use plus interest plus legal fees came to exactly $247,832. But Garrett wasn't greedy. He was strategic. He'd demand $174,000, a number that covered the actual damages while leaving room for negotiation. More importantly, it was a number that would force the HOA to take him seriously without triggering immediate litigation. The technical execution required more subtle planning. Garrett needed to demonstrate his capability without actually damaging anything, at least not yet. So he designed a hydraulic control system that could support or withdraw support from the pool deck structure. Install it properly, and he could literally raise or lower their pool deck at will. The beauty of the system was its reversibility. No permanent damage, no destruction of property, just a gentle demonstration of who actually controlled the land their amenities were built on. Think of it as a very expensive, very public teaching tool. Building the system required some creative procurement, hydraulic cylinders from a construction equipment supplier, steel mounting plates fabricated in his workshop, control valves connected to a master switch panel that he could operate from his kitchen window. His neighbor Joe, a retired plumber who'd been watching the drama unfold with growing amusement, offered to help with the underground connections. "Garrett, this is either genius or completely insane," Joe said as they installed the hydraulic lines. "I'm honestly not sure which." "Probably both," Garrett replied, checking his measurements one more time. "But at least it'll be memorable." The timeline was critical. Installation had to happen during the week when most HOA members were at work, but close enough to the weekend that the demonstration would have maximum impact. Garrett chose Thursday for installation, planning his reveal for Saturday afternoon when the pool would be crowded with families. But first came the formal legal notice. David drafted a professional letter demanding payment for unauthorized property use, with detailed documentation and a clear deadline. Pay $174,000 within 30 days, or face legal action to remove the encroachment. The letter was delivered on Friday morning, giving Vivian and the HOA board exactly 24 hours to process the implications before Garrett's demonstration on Saturday. As he sealed the envelope, Garrett reflected on how much his life had changed since that first bogus assessment arrived. 3 months ago, he just wanted to be left alone. Now he was about to teach an entire community about property rights, hydraulic engineering, and the dangers of messing with former Marines. The sweet smell of success was already in the air. Vivian's response to the legal notice arrived faster than a pizza delivery. At 7 a.m. Saturday morning, Garrett opened his door to find not just the pink Porsche, but a black Escalade with tinted windows and 2 serious-looking men in expensive suits. "Mr. Riverside," Vivian announced, her voice tight with barely controlled fury, "these are my legal representatives from Morrison, Blake & Associates." The older suit, silver-haired, expensive watch, the kind of lawyer who bills $400 an hour, stepped forward with a briefcase that probably cost more than Garrett's monthly pension. "Sir, I'm Charles Morrison. We represent the Cedar Oaks Homeowners Association. This frivolous demand for money based on a disputed property line is harassment, and we're prepared to pursue criminal charges if you don't withdraw your claims immediately." Garrett had been expecting this. Bullies always escalate to intimidation when their victims fight back. He'd seen it in procurement disputes, divorce proceedings, and now HOA warfare. Disputed property line? Garrett kept his voice level, noting how Morrison positioned himself to block the view of the other suit taking pictures of Garrett's property. "I have a certified survey. What do you have?" Morrison opened his briefcase with theatrical precision. "We have aerial photographs proving the pool deck has existed in its current location for over 4 years without objection from you. That constitutes implied consent to the current arrangement." Here's a knowledge nugget that might save you from expensive legal mistakes. Implied consent is a real concept, but it requires specific conditions. The property owner must know about the encroachment, have the ability to object, and choose not to exercise their rights for a significant period. Simply not noticing someone is using your property doesn't create implied consent. Translation: if someone steals your land and you don't find out for years, they can't claim you agreed to let them keep it. "Implied consent requires knowledge," Garrett replied. "I only discovered the encroachment 3 weeks ago when I had the property surveyed. Before that, the fence blocked my view of the exact boundary." Morrison's confident smile flickered. "Regardless, the substantial cost of removal makes your demands unconscionable. No reasonable court would order the destruction of community amenities over a minor boundary dispute." That's when Vivian made her mistake. She'd been getting more agitated during the legal posturing, and her patience finally snapped. "Look, this is ridiculous," she burst out. "We've improved your property values. That pool deck makes your house worth more money. You should be thanking us." Morrison actually winced. In one emotional outburst, Vivian had just admitted they knew about the encroachment and had never attempted to get permission. Her own lawyer was probably calculating the billable hours this would cost. The second suit, younger, hungrier looking, tried to recover. Mrs. Ashford misspoke. What she meant was exactly what she said, Garrett interrupted. "You built on my land without permission, and now you think I should be grateful." Morrison closed his briefcase with a sharp snap. "Mr. Riverside, my client is prepared to offer a reasonable settlement for your concerns. Perhaps we could discuss a modest compensation in exchange for a formal easement agreement." "How modest?" $5,000. Garrett laughed, actually laughed out loud. "You want to buy 15 feet of premium property for $5,000? Property that generates $58,000 in annual rental value? The offer is generous considering the legal costs you'll face if this goes to court." Here's where Garrett's military training kicked in. Never show your full capability until you're ready to use it. Let them think they're winning right up until they lose. "I'll consider your offer," he said calmly. "Give me 24 hours to think it over." Morrison relaxed slightly. "Excellent. I'm sure we can reach a reasonable accommodation." After they left, Garrett spent the morning making final adjustments to his hydraulic system. The control panel in his kitchen window was elegant in its simplicity. 3 switches labeled Support, Neutral, and Adjust, currently set to Support, maintaining full structural integrity of the pool deck. Around noon, the private investigators showed up. Garrett was tightening a hydraulic fitting when he noticed the unmarked van parked across the street. 2 men with cameras, trying to be subtle while documenting his every move. Professional surveillance, probably costing the HOA $500 a day. But the mini twist came when Garrett recognized the van's license plate. He'd photographed it 3 weeks earlier when those same investigators had been hired to document his fence construction. Vivian was recycling her intimidation tactics, probably hoping he'd forgotten about their earlier surveillance. Instead of confronting them, Garrett waved cheerfully and went back to his work. Let them document everything. In about 6 hours, they'd have some very interesting footage to show their clients. The pool party was scheduled to start at 2 p.m., perfect timing for a demonstration of property rights in action. By 1:30 p.m., the Cedar Oaks community pool was transforming into the kind of weekend paradise that real estate brochures dream about. The scent of grilled burgers drifted from the poolside barbecue while kids splashed in the shallow end and adults nursed cold drinks under bright umbrellas. Someone had strung lights around the pool deck, and a playlist of summer hits provided the soundtrack for suburban bliss. Garrett watched from his kitchen window as families claimed spots around the pool. About 50 people so far. Parents setting up chairs, kids running around with pool noodles, teenagers clustered around their phones, normal people enjoying normal weekend activities on his stolen property. His phone buzzed with a text from David Palmer. Got word from Morrison's office. They're filing for an emergency restraining order Monday morning. Whatever you're planning, they're trying to stop it. Perfect. That meant they'd figured out he wasn't bluffing, but they hadn't figured out what his actual plan was. Amateur hour meets precision engineering. At exactly 2 p.m., Vivian made her grand entrance. The pink Porsche pulled into the parking area like she was arriving at a movie premiere, followed by what looked like half the HOA board. She wore a white sundress that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage, along with sunglasses that could have been featured in a fashion magazine. But the real show was behind her. 3 black SUVs parked in formation, disgorging a team of what could only be described as corporate security. Not the bumbling rent-a-cops from before. These were professionals. Ex-military types in matching polo shirts with earpieces and the kind of situational awareness that comes from real training. Garrett had to admire the escalation. Vivian was clearly spending serious money to win this fight. She set up court near the pool bar, holding what appeared to be an impromptu board meeting while gesturing frequently toward Garrett's house. Even through the glass, he could see her animation level rising as she briefed her team on the situation. Around 2:30, one of the security professionals approached Garrett's fence line. Tall, calm, professional, the kind of guy who'd actually read the legal documents before taking the job. He made eye contact with Garrett through the kitchen window and held up a cell phone, clearly requesting a conversation. Garrett stepped onto his back porch. "Can I help you?" "Sir, I'm Kevin Murphy, Risk Management for Blackstone Security. I understand there's a property dispute in progress." "That's correct. My client has asked me to ensure this gathering proceeds peacefully. I'm hoping we can avoid any complications." Murphy was good. Professional tone, respectful approach, no implied threats. He was also smart enough to recognize that Garrett wasn't some random neighbor having a property line tantrum. "I have no intention of disrupting anyone's party," Garrett replied truthfully. "Appreciate that, sir. Mind if I ask what your intentions are?" "I intend to exercise my property rights in accordance with the law." Murphy nodded slowly. You could see him processing the implications, probably calculating whether his expensive suit was worth the risk of whatever was about to happen. "Sir, would you be willing to postpone any property rights exercise until Monday, when the lawyers can sort this out?" "The lawyers have had 4 years to sort this out. Today seems like a good day for clarity." That's when Vivian made her final mistake. Whether she was frustrated with Murphy's diplomatic approach or just couldn't resist micromanaging, she stalked over to the fence line in her designer heels and raised her voice loud enough for half the party to hear. "Kevin, stop negotiating with this lunatic. Just document everything so we can get him arrested for harassment." Murphy's professional composure slipped for just a moment, a brief eye roll that suggested he'd dealt with difficult clients before. "Ma'am, perhaps we should discuss this privately. I want everyone here to witness what happens when people threaten our community. This man is trying to destroy our pool over some imaginary property line." The party had gone quiet now, families turning to watch the drama unfold. Kids sensed the tension and moved closer to their parents. Someone turned off the music. Garrett checked his watch, 2:47 p.m. Close enough. He walked back into his kitchen and flipped the hydraulic control switch from support to neutral. The effect was immediate but subtle. A slight settling sensation as the 15-foot section of pool deck lost its primary structural support. Not collapse, just a gentle reminder of what was holding it up. Several people near the pool edge looked around confused as their chairs shifted slightly. Someone's drink glass slid an inch across their patio table. The mini twist was watching Murphy's face as he realized what had just happened. Professional security training included basic engineering principles, and you could see the moment he understood they were standing on a hydraulic platform controlled by the man they'd been hired to intimidate. Time for the finale. Garrett flipped the switch to adjust. What happened next was like watching physics demonstrate property law in real time. The 15-foot section of pool deck, the section built on his land, slowly began retracting toward the actual property boundary. Not collapsing, not breaking, just smoothly withdrawing support, as the hydraulic system did exactly what it was designed to do. The sound was magnificent. A low mechanical hum mixed with the splash of water as the pool's edge suddenly changed configuration. 47 people found themselves sliding, stumbling, and eventually falling into the shallow end as their premium poolside real estate transformed into an impromptu swimming lesson. Vivian's scream cut through the chaos like a fire alarm. "What are you doing?" Murphy, to his credit, managed to grab 2 kids before they hit the water. But his expensive suit was now soaked, his earpiece was floating somewhere near the pool drain, and his professional composure had officially left the building. Garrett stepped onto his back porch and addressed the dripping, angry crowd with military calm. "Ladies and gentlemen, you've just experienced a practical demonstration of property boundaries. The section of pool deck you were enjoying was built 15 feet onto my land without permission." A woman in a designer swimsuit, one of the HOA board members, stood waist-deep in chlorinated water and pointed an accusing finger at him. "This is terrorism. You could have killed someone." "Ma'am, the maximum water depth in that section is 3 feet. The greatest danger was wet clothes and wounded pride." But the real show was just beginning. 3 news vans had appeared in the parking lot, local affiliates who'd gotten tips about a community dispute and arrived expecting boring interviews about fence heights. Instead, they were rolling cameras on the most spectacular property rights demonstration in suburban history. Channel 7's field reporter, a energetic blonde who'd clearly won the lottery of weekend assignments, splashed through puddles to get closer to the action. "This is Sarah Martinez with Channel 7 News, coming to you live from Cedar Oaks subdivision, where a property dispute has taken a dramatic turn. Sir." She thrust her microphone toward Garrett. "Can you explain what just happened here?" Garrett had been waiting 4 months for this moment. For 4 years, the Cedar Oaks HOA has operated pool facilities on property they don't own. They've charged residents fees for amenities built on stolen land. When I discovered this and demanded fair compensation, they responded with harassment, fake legal documents, and intimidation tactics. Murphy was trying to clear the pool area while speaking urgently into a backup radio. Vivian had retrieved her phone from the pool filter and was screaming at someone, probably Morrison, the lawyer who was about to have a very expensive Monday morning. "So you decided to— What exactly did you do?" Sarah pressed. "I demonstrated that their pool deck was built on hydraulic supports extending onto my property. I simply withdrew my support for their unauthorized construction." The camera panned across the soggy chaos as families helped each other out of the unexpectedly deep water. Kids were crying, adults were shivering in wet clothes, and someone's barbecue had toppled over during the evacuation, sending hot dogs floating like tiny life preservers. But here's where the story got interesting. As the initial shock wore off, some residents started asking different questions. "Wait," called out Joe Martinez from Unit 47, wringing out his polo shirt. "You mean our HOA fees have been paying for facilities built on someone else's land?" "That's exactly what it means," Garrett replied. "Your association has been operating amenities they had no legal right to build." Margaret Palmer from the board of directors, the treasurer who actually read financial documents, looked like someone had just explained why their insurance premiums kept increasing. "Vivian, did you know about this?" Vivian was still on the phone, but her voice carried clearly across the water. "I don't care what it costs. Get a judge to make him stop." Kevin Murphy approached the fence line again. this time looking like a man who'd just calculated the liability exposure for his security company. "Sir, I need to ask, can you restore the deck structure?" "I can," Garrett replied, "but only on property I actually own." Channel 7's camera captured the perfect moment. Vivian emerging from the pool house office, designer dress clinging wetly to her frame, holding a legal document and shouting into her phone while 50 of her neighbors stood in soaked clothes wondering how their community association had managed to build a pool on someone else's land. The reporter turned back to camera with barely contained glee. "This is Sarah Martinez, Channel 7 News, where a routine HOA dispute has become a very wet lesson in property rights. We'll continue following this developing story." And that's when Garrett delivered his mic drop moment. Maybe next time, they'll ask permission before building on other people's land. The aftermath was swift and satisfying. Within 48 hours, 3 things happened that changed everything. First, Morrison's law firm quietly withdrew from representing the HOA. Apparently, taking a case where your client had built expensive amenities on stolen land while harassing the actual property owner didn't meet their professional standards. Or maybe they just didn't want to explain to a judge why they'd threatened criminal charges against a man exercising his legitimate property rights. Second, the local news picked up the story. Sarah Martinez's weekend splash, literally, became the lead story Monday evening. HOA pool built on stolen land led to investigative pieces about HOA overreach, property rights, and the dangers of unchecked suburban bureaucracy. Vivian's pink Porsche became a symbol of entitled excess, while Garrett emerged as the David who'd stood up to suburban Goliath. Third, and most importantly, the Cedar Oaks board voted unanimously to settle. The vote happened during an emergency meeting held Tuesday night in the community center with about 200 residents packed into a room designed for 50. The air conditioning couldn't keep up with the crowd, and the windows were fogged with condensation and tension. Garrett didn't attend. David Palmer represented his interests while he stayed home, monitoring the proceedings through social media posts from residents live streaming the chaos. The entertainment value was spectacular. Board member after board member stood up to distance themselves from Vivian's aggressive approach to community management. The treasurer revealed that the association's legal fees had consumed their entire reserve fund. The secretary read resignations from 3 committee chairs who'd apparently decided that suburban politics wasn't worth the stress. When the final vote came, settlement terms of $174,000 plus legal fees, removal of all claims against Garrett's property, and Vivian's immediate resignation as president, it passed 6-0 with 1 abstention. Vivian herself. The settlement check arrived Friday morning along with a formal apology letter signed by the new board president. Margaret Palmer, the former treasurer who'd asked the right questions during the pool incident, had been elected to replace Vivian. Her first official act was establishing new policies requiring legal review of all property modifications and prohibiting harassment of residents over disputed fees. Garrett deposited the check that afternoon, then did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He donated $25,000 to the local Veterans Center for a new woodworking therapy program. Another $15,000 went to the county legal aid clinic to help other residents facing HOA disputes. The rest went into his retirement account along with a note to his financial advisor. Pool party profits, invest conservatively. But the real resolution came 2 weeks later, when his daughter Sarah brought the grandkids over for their regular Sunday visit. As they played in the backyard, Sarah asked the question he'd been expecting. "Dad, was all of this really about the money?" Garrett watched his 7-year-old grandson measuring distances with a toy ruler. Apparently the precision gene ran in the family. "It was about standing up for what's right. Your great-grandfather bought this land fair and square. Nobody gets to steal it because they think they're more important than property law." And the pool deck thing? Sometimes people need visual aids to understand complex concepts. The community has transformed since the pool incident, as residents now call it. Property boundary disputes are resolved through professional surveying rather than intimidation. The HOA operates with actual transparency, posting financial records and legal documents online. Most surprisingly, several other non-member residents have come forward with their own stories of fee harassment, stories that are now being resolved through negotiation rather than litigation. Kevin Murphy, the security professional who'd tried to manage the chaos, sent Garrett a LinkedIn connection request with a note. "Impressive work. If you ever want a second career in risk management, give me a call." Vivian moved to Florida 3 months later. The pink Porsche sold to a teenager whose parents thought it would teach her about consequences. The house went on the market with no mention of proximity to community amenities. These days, Garrett spends his mornings in the workshop and his afternoons tending a garden that nobody tries to improve without permission. His mother still visits monthly, always commenting on how much happier he seems. His roses recovered completely from their mulch burial and are producing the best blooms he's ever grown.
So, Garrett Riverside walked away with $174,000 and touched an entire HOA board. What happens when you mess with a married engineer? Property rights. But here's what really mattered about this story. This wasn't about the money. It was about principle. Vivian thought she could steamroll a quiet retire with victories and intimidation tactics. She forgot that some people don't back down when they are right. Gary didn't waver through luck or connections. He went through documentations, patience, and understanding the law better than the people trying to break it. We're seeing this everywhere now. Petty bureaucrats drunk on tiny amount of power, thinking rules to apply to them. The difference is, most people get angry and make mistakes. Gary got methodical and made high-talk clicks. Here's my question for you. When someone tries to steal from you using fake authority, do you fight back or fold? Drop the answer and in the comments, because I read every single one. If the sky of justice serve content in your thing, smash the subscribe button. Next week, how a veteran tank mechanic deal with predatory towing using military surplus and municipal parking lots. Remember, knowing your rights, document everything, and never underestimate precision over passions.